Sometimes, the people we least expect become the ones who change our lives forever. Before we continue with the story, do well to comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories like this one you're about to watch. That said, sit back and enjoy the ride. That's how it all began for Veronica Holloway, the billionaire CEO of one of the largest tech firms in the country. She had everything that money could buy: mansions, luxury cars, a thriving business empire. But behind the glimmering walls of her wealth, she carried a secret burden. Veronica was a single mother, and despite her success, nothing terrified her more than the thought of losing her little daughter, Emily. Veronica's mornings were always the same: fast-paced, chaotic, and meticulously scheduled. But that day was different. She had an emergency board meeting that required her full attention, and her nanny had called in sick at the last minute. With her personal assistant scrambling to find a replacement, Veronica had no choice but to bring Emily along to the corporate tower where her empire was headquartered. The Holloway Tower was a masterpiece of glass and steel, reaching into the clouds like a symbol of power and ambition. Employees moved with urgency, each step echoing the demand for perfection that Veronica herself exuded. But in the midst of that hustle, there was one man who seemed invisible to everyone: Marcus Carter, the janitor. Marcus was a tall, muscular man in his early 30s. His green uniform marked him as the help, and most executives never bothered to look him in the eye. To them, he was just another maintenance worker, someone whose life and struggles were too far removed from their world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. But Marcus carried his own untold story. A war veteran turned janitor, he had returned home years ago to find no place waiting for him. Jobs were scarce, bills piled high, and he took what he could get. Cleaning floors in Veronica's tower wasn't glamorous, but it was steady and it was honest work. That morning, as Veronica rushed into the building carrying Emily in her arms, Marcus happened to be polishing the marble floors of the lobby. Their eyes met for a brief second. Veronica, distracted, didn't think much of it. Marcus, however, noticed the way Emily clung tightly to her mother's neck, her little eyes wide with both love and uncertainty. The board meeting began, and Veronica's attention was pulled away from her daughter. She had asked her secretary to keep an eye on Emily, but in the chaos of handling phone calls and corporate crises, the child wandered off. Emily's soft footsteps echoed against the marble floor as she toddled into the hallway, holding her tiny bottle that had long run empty. Her cries began softly, then grew louder, echoing through the expensive silence of the tower's top floor. Marcus heard her before anyone else did. He turned a corner and saw the little girl sitting on the polished floor, tears streaking her cheeks. He froze. He knew the rules: janitors were not to interfere with the CEO's family, but something about Emily's cries pierced his chest. He remembered his younger sister back home, the way she used to cry when their parents weren't around. Without thinking, Marcus picked her up gently. Emily, surprisingly, didn't resist. She nestled against his chest as though she recognized safety in his arms. "Hey there, little one," Marcus murmured, his deep voice soothing. "You're hungry, aren't you?" She pointed weakly to the empty bottle. Marcus glanced around. No one was watching. He thought quickly. He had seen a staff lounge downstairs with a small kitchenette. Holding Emily carefully, he made his way there. He rinsed the bottle, filled it with warm milk, and soon enough Emily was sucking happily, her little fingers curling around his hand. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a strange warmth, a sense of purpose he thought he'd lost. Meanwhile, the board meeting raged on. Veronica dominated the room, firing off strategies and shutting down dissent, but beneath her sharp tone, her mind kept wandering. Emily, was she all right? When the meeting finally adjourned, Veronica stormed out, heels clicking against the polished floor. She expected to see her daughter with her secretary, but the chair was empty. Panic shot through her veins. She checked every office, every hallway. Her heart raced faster than it had in years, a cold sweat dripping down her neck. And then she heard it: soft laughter, Emily's laughter. She followed the sound to the lounge, her breath catching in her throat when the door swung open. There, sitting comfortably on a couch, was Marcus, the janitor, feeding her daughter. Emily giggled as he made silly faces, the bottle held firmly in his steady hands. The sight made Veronica's blood boil. "You," she snapped, storming inside. "What do you think you're doing with my child?" Marcus looked up, startled, but his arms instinctively tightened protectively around Emily. "Ma'am," she was crying, "she was hungry. No one was around." "Don't you dare tell me how to care for my child!" Veronica's voice cracked like a whip. Her anger wasn't just at him, it was at herself for losing track of her daughter, for letting this moment happen. but her pride wouldn't allow her to admit it. Emily whimpered at the raised voice, her little hand gripping Marcus's shirt tightly. "Give her to me now," Veronica demanded. Marcus hesitated, then slowly stood, placing Emily gently back in her mother's arms. "I meant no harm," he said quietly. "I just couldn't leave her crying." Veronica glared at him, her jaw tight, her breath heavy. "Stay away from my daughter. If I ever see you near her again, you'll regret it." Marcus nodded silently, but something flickered in his eyes, not fear but a quiet strength. That night Veronica couldn't sleep. She replayed the moment in her head over and over, the way Emily had clung to the janitor, the way he had held her so naturally. Why did her daughter, who rejected almost every stranger, trust him? For a woman who believed money could buy loyalty, safety, and comfort, this unsettled her deeply. She tried to shake it off, but fate had other plans. The next morning, another crisis erupted. A cyber attack threatened her company's servers, pulling her into back-to-back meetings. Once again, Emily was left in the care of assistants who, truth be told, were more focused on their phones than the baby. And once again, it was Marcus who heard Emily's cries echoing down the hall. This time, he hesitated. He remembered Veronica's warning, but when he turned the corner and saw Emily standing dangerously close to the top of a stairwell, his instincts took over. "Emily," he gasped, sprinting forward. He scooped her up just as she lost balance, her tiny arms flying outward. The child burst into tears, clinging to him tightly. Marcus held her close, his heart pounding. "I got you, you're safe." It was at that moment that Veronica appeared at the end of the hall. She froze, her eyes widening as she saw the janitor once again holding her baby. Only this time, she had also seen the danger her daughter had been in. Her lips parted to shout, but the words caught in her throat. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure if the janitor was her enemy or her daughter's guardian angel. The hallway was silent except for the faint sound of Emily's sniffles as she clung tightly to Marcus. Veronica's heels clicked against the polished floor as she approached, her mind warring between fury and something she didn't want to admit, relief. She had just seen the near accident. Her baby, her everything would have tumbled down those marble stairs if it weren't for Marcus. But her pride, her walls of steel, would not let her soften, not yet. "Hand her over," she said stiffly, extending her arms. Marcus obeyed, but slowly, almost reluctantly. Emily whined, her tiny fingers curling around his collar as if begging to stay. It stung Veronica more than she cared to admit. When Emily was finally in her arms, Veronica stared at Marcus coldly. "Why is it always you? Why do I keep finding my child with you?" Marcus held her gaze, his voice calm. "Because I hear her when others don't." Those words hung in the air like a heavy weight. For a second, Veronica's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to snap back, to put him in his place, but deep down, she knew he was right. Her assistants weren't dependable. Her nannies cycled in and out, each one leaving after a few weeks, overwhelmed by the demands of working for a billionaire single mom. And she had been too consumed by her empire to notice. Still, Veronica was not the type to show weakness. She straightened her back, masking the turmoil inside her. "Stay in your lane, janitor, do your job and nothing more." Marcus gave a short nod, but in his eyes there was no submission, only quiet disappointment. He turned and walked away, leaving Veronica clutching Emily tighter than ever. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. Veronica avoided Marcus whenever possible, but she couldn't erase the image of her daughter laughing in his arms. Emily had always been a sensitive child, she rarely took to strangers, yet with Marcus she seemed at peace. That unsettled Veronica more than anything. One late evening, after a grueling day of negotiations, Veronica walked through the dimly lit hallways of Holloway Tower with Emily asleep against her shoulder. She paused when she noticed movement down the corridor. It was Marcus again. He was kneeling by the supply closet, rolling up his sleeves as he scrubbed a stubborn stain off the floor. His muscular arms flexed with each stroke, his face damp with sweat, yet his expression was calm, almost meditative. Veronica frowned. Why does he work like this with such quiet dignity? Doesn't he hate being invisible? Her curiosity surprised her. She had never once wondered about the lives of her janitorial staff. To her, they were background figures, invisible cogs in her tower of power. Yet here she was, standing in the shadows, watching one of them with an interest she couldn't quite explain. Emily stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. Marcus glanced up at the sound. Their eyes met across the hall. For a brief second, Veronica felt something unsettling, like he could see past her icy facade and into the exhaustion she carried beneath her billionaire armor. She quickly turned away, muttering under her breath, "Ridiculous." But fate was not finished weaving their lives together. 2 days later, disaster struck. During a high-profile investor event hosted in the grand atrium of Holloway Tower, all eyes were on Veronica. Dressed in a sleek gown, she was every inch the commanding CEO. Cameras flashed, investors whispered, and the weight of millions rested on her every word. But as she presented, a sudden cry pierced the air, a child's cry. "Emily!" Veronica froze mid-sentence, panic flashing across her face. The guests turned their heads as one of her assistants awkwardly shuffled in, holding the wailing toddler. The woman looked frazzled, her phone still clutched in one hand, clearly overwhelmed. "Apologies, Ms. Holloway," the assistant stammered. She wouldn't stop crying. The humiliation burned Veronica's skin. Her investors were watching. The room was whispering. She felt her empire slipping with every passing second. And then, cutting through the chaos, came a deep, steady voice. "Let me try." Marcus had stepped forward from the edge of the room, his green uniform standing out against the glittering gowns and sharp suits. Everyone turned, eyebrows raised, whispers spreading like wildfire. Before Veronica could stop him, Marcus gently took Emily into his arms. Almost instantly, the cries softened. Within moments, Emily was giggling, tugging playfully at the edge of his collar. The room fell silent in shock. A billionaire's daughter, soothed by a janitor. Veronica's face burned red, not just from embarrassment but from something deeper, something she couldn't name. Marcus handed Emily back carefully, his voice low so only Veronica could hear. She just needed someone to feel her, to see her. Veronica's throat tightened. She wanted to dismiss him, to snap that he was overstepping. But instead, she turned back to the crowd, her CEO mask snapping back into place. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said smoothly, forcing a confident smile, "if my daughter has taught me anything, it's that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. Now, where were we?" Laughter rippled through the room, the tension breaking. The presentation continued. The investors were impressed with her poise, but inside, Veronica was anything but calm. That night, she couldn't shake the image of Marcus holding Emily. Why did her daughter only calm in his arms? What was it about him that her child trusted so instinctively? Lying awake in her penthouse bedroom, Veronica stared at the ceiling, her mind restless. She hated the idea of depending on anyone, let alone a janitor, yet part of her couldn't ignore the truth. She was failing as a mother. And Marcus was filling the gap. The next morning, Veronica made a decision that surprised even herself. She summoned Marcus to her office. When he entered, he carried himself with quiet confidence, though his eyes flickered with caution. Veronica sat behind her sleek mahogany desk, Emily playing on the floor nearby. "I need to ask you something," Veronica began, her voice sharp but tinged with unease. "Why does my daughter trust you so much?" Marcus hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I see her, Ms. Holloway, not as the daughter of a billionaire, not as a burden or a responsibility, just as a child who needs love and attention." His words cut deeper than Veronica expected. She tried to mask her reaction, but her chest ached. Marcus continued, his tone respectful but firm. "With all due respect, ma'am, you're surrounded by people who serve your wealth, not your heart. Emily feels that. Children know when they're unseen." Veronica's nails dug into her desk. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not her board members, not her assistants, not even her family, and yet, instead of rage, she felt something else. Shame. She wanted to dismiss him, to end the conversation, but Emily crawled toward Marcus at that very moment, tugging at his leg and babbling happily. The sight was undeniable. Veronica sighed heavily, leaning back in her chair. "You're overstepping, but you're not wrong." There was a long silence. Finally, Veronica said the words she never thought she would. "Would you consider helping me, not as a janitor, as someone who watches Emily?" Marcus blinked, taken aback. "You're asking me to be her nanny." Veronica's jaw tightened. "Temporary, just until I find someone qualified, don't get any ideas." But Marcus wasn't smiling or gloating, he simply nodded, his gaze steady. "If it means she's safe, then yes, I'll do it." And so the unlikeliest arrangement began. Marcus, the janitor, became the quiet guardian of the billionaire's daughter. He played with Emily, fed her, comforted her, and taught her things that Veronica's revolving door of nannies never could. At first, Veronica watched with suspicion, her eyes always sharp, waiting for him to slip. But the more she saw, the harder it became to deny the truth. Marcus wasn't just good with Emily, he was exceptional. One afternoon, Veronica came home early to find Marcus teaching Emily how to walk. His large hands hovered protectively by her sides as she took her first wobbly steps across the plush rug. When she collapsed into giggles, he laughed too, scooping her up in celebration. Veronica stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes stinging unexpectedly. She had missed so many firsts in her daughter's life because of her work, but here was this man, this janitor, witnessing them. It hurt, but it also healed. Still, Veronica fought against the pull she felt. Because with every laugh Emily shared with Marcus, Veronica's walls cracked a little more, and she was terrified of what that meant. Marcus, on the other hand, carried a quiet secret. Every time he looked at Veronica, every time he held Emily, there was a flicker in his eyes, something he hadn't told her yet. Something that would shock her more than she could imagine. And soon that secret would come to light. For weeks, the strange arrangement continued. Marcus, once invisible in his green janitor's uniform, was now a constant presence in Veronica's home. What began as a temporary solution had turned into something deeper, something Veronica never could have predicted. Every morning, Marcus arrived promptly, and every evening he left quietly. In between, he gave Emily the kind of attention Veronica struggled to balance with her demanding career. At first, Veronica tried to keep her distance. She buried herself in meetings, projects, and late-night negotiations. But no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't ignore the sound of laughter echoing from the living room or the sight of Emily running to Marcus before even noticing her mother had entered the room. It gnawed at her. One evening, Veronica found herself lingering in the hallway, watching unnoticed as Marcus read a bedtime story to Emily. His deep voice rolled over the words with warmth, and Emily's eyes fluttered sleepily as she nestled against his chest. Veronica's throat tightened. For years she had convinced herself she could do everything alone, that she didn't need anyone, that love was a weakness. But here, right before her, was proof of what she had been missing. And it terrified her. A week later, the truth began to unravel. Veronica had left a late-night gala earlier than expected. When she entered her penthouse, she found Marcus in the kitchen, not with Emily but staring at an old photo frame on the counter. The photo was of Veronica, younger, holding a newborn Emily in her arms. "What are you doing?" she snapped, startling him. Marcus set the frame down carefully, his face unreadable. "I was just looking." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "That's private, you have no right to." "I know," Marcus cut in quietly. His voice was steady but his eyes burned with something heavy. "But there's something I need to tell you." Veronica folded her arms, her heart pounding. "What could you possibly have to say that I'd want to hear?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Emily isn't just your daughter, she's mine too." The words hit Veronica like a thunderclap. Her face drained of color, her body stiffened. What did you just say?" Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't plan to tell you like this, but you deserve the truth. Years ago, before your company exploded in success, before Emily was even born, we met at that charity event, you remember." Veronica staggered back, her breath catching. Memories she had long buried clawed their way to the surface. A night of vulnerability after too many glasses of wine, a stranger's comforting words, the kind of intimacy she had sworn never to repeat. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus nodded slowly. "I didn't know about Emily until I saw her here in this tower. The resemblance, the timing, I put it together. I took this job just to survive, but when I realized she was mine, everything changed." Veronica's world spun. She wanted to deny it, to scream at him, to call him a liar. But deep down, something told her it was true. Emily's attachment, her trust, the way she clung to Marcus, it all made sense now. The next few days were chaos. Veronica avoided Marcus, locking herself in her office, struggling to process the revelation. How could she have not known? How could she let a man like him, just a janitor, be the father of her child? Her pride screamed at her to cut ties, to fire him, to erase him from their lives. But every time she looked at Emily, she saw Marcus, in her laughter, in her stubborn little frown, even in her eyes. And worse, Emily missed him. She cried at night, calling for Mark. She refused to eat until he came around. Her tiny heart already knew the truth, even if Veronica wasn't ready to admit it. Finally, Veronica confronted him. "You lied to me," she accused, storming into the lounge where Marcus was cleaning. "I never lied," Marcus replied evenly. "I just didn't tell you sooner. I was waiting for the right time." "There is no right time to drop something like that," Veronica's voice cracked with rage. "Do you have any idea what this does to me, to my reputation, to my life?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "This isn't about your reputation, this is about Emily. She deserves to know her father, and you know as well as I do, I've been there for her in ways no one else has." Veronica's breath trembled, tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You think being her father is about holding her when she cries, about feeding her a bottle? I built this life for her, I gave her everything." Marcus's voice softened, but it cut sharper than any blade. "Except your time." The silence that followed was unbearable. Veronica's chest heaved, her pride and pain battling inside her. For the first time, she felt powerless, not as a CEO, but as a mother. That night, Veronica lay awake, staring at the city lights from her penthouse window. Marcus's words echoed in her head. "Except your time." She hated him for saying it, but more than that, she hated herself for knowing it was true. The next morning, Emily ran to Marcus the moment he entered, squealing with joy. Veronica watched from the doorway, her heart breaking and healing all at once. Slowly, her walls began to crumble. Weeks passed, and the tension gave way to uneasy cooperation. Veronica allowed Marcus to spend more time with Emily, though she kept a watchful eye. Slowly, she began to notice things she had never allowed herself to see. Marcus wasn't just a janitor, he was intelligent, patient, and fiercely protective. He taught Emily how to share, how to be kind, how to laugh without fear. He even taught her to say, "Mommy, I love you," a phrase that brought Veronica to tears when she first heard it. The more Veronica watched, the harder it became to deny the truth. Marcus was not the threat she feared, he was the partner she never thought she needed. And in his presence, she began to change too. For the first time in years, Veronica canceled meetings to spend afternoons in the park with her daughter. She learned to laugh again, to sit on the floor and play with blocks, to read bedtime stories instead of leaving them to others. It wasn't easy, but slowly, mother and daughter began to build something real. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Veronica found Marcus sitting on the balcony, staring at the skyline. She joined him quietly, Emily asleep inside. "You turned my world upside down," she admitted softly. Marcus gave a small smile. "So did you." Veronica looked at him, her voice trembling. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know Emily needs you, and maybe I do too." For the first time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, not as a CEO, but as a woman. Marcus reached over, his hand brushing hers. "Then we'll figure it out together." And for the first time in a long time, Veronica believed it. Well, life has a way of humbling us. Wealth, power, and pride can build walls so high that love and truth struggle to get through. But sometimes, the very people we least expect, the ones society overlooks, hold the keys to our healing. Veronica learned that true wealth wasn't in her billions, but in the laughter of her daughter and the unexpected love she found in the man she once dismissed. Marcus proved that a title doesn't define a man's worth, his heart does. And Emily, she grew up knowing what every child deserves to know, the love of both her parents. If you enjoyed this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more intense, shocking, and lesson-filled stories like this one.